Hi, everyone, and welcome to Esade's Do Better webinar, Competing on Customer Outcomes. Today with us, we have Marco Bertini, Professor of Marketing from Esade Business School, and Oded Koenigsberg, Professor of Marketing at London Business School. And Marco and Oded published recently a very interesting book called The End Game, How Smart Companies Stop Selling Products and Start Delivering Value. And in today's seminar, we'll hear from them about the main topic of this book, which has to do with a recently popular trend of shifting to selling outcomes. So Marco and Oded, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And let me kick this off right away with the first question. So the book is titled End Game, and I can actually see it on Oded's bookshelf there in the back, blue and yellow. The main title, the sort of catchphrase is End Game. Can you tell us about what this is? What are the ends, and what is the book about?
Ivanka, thank you very much for having us. And we are marketing profs, so it would be kind of weird if one of us at least didn't have the book publicized somewhere behind us. So the End Game, where did we come up with that? So Oded and I have been interested in this topic of business models for a very, very long time. We both teach pricing courses. We both work a lot with organizations on pricing questions, and we've always been very frustrated, almost too much frustrated, I think, when you have companies really focusing on a very, very smart that pricing, which is how low do I set my price? And we say to them, look, your business model is actually much more strategic and much more important. Don't spend so much time on the pricing question. Think about exactly how you align your business model with the customers. Now, to answer your question, if you think about customers, and this is something we've known since 1960, Theodore Levitt, famous marketing guru, he came up with this article called Marketing Myopia, and he said, people don't buy drills, they buy holes in the wall, okay? So the drills are the means to an end, right, that the customer is actually looking for. Okay, so we understand that very well. As most companies today are customer focused, or they claim to be, understand that very well. I have to think about customer needs, jobs to be done, call them whatever you want, and then I have to work my way backwards and think about what are the products and services that get to those needs the best. Okay, but when it comes to actually changing that value, all that goodness that I've created for customers into revenue for the business, which is absolutely essential, otherwise I die as a business tomorrow. A lot of businesses, because they're very much internally driven when it comes to the pricing question, they don't think about these ends, the hole in the wall. They think about, then what did a drill cost me? What risk can I tolerate on selling this?
Oded, we seem to have lost Marco. I don't know if you would like to unmute yourself and add a couple of points.
I'm looking for ends. Yeah, I think we went out for a second. Then there's a big gap, and that gap is what we call wasteful. The word waste is very big in the book, and waste means very suboptimal decisions in a marketplace.
Cool. So the ways the suboptimal decisions on the marketplace are then born partially by customers, and I suppose partially by companies to a certain extent. Can you tell us a little bit more on this customer side? What is the value of doing this for a customer? Why would they choose to move to outcomes instead of buying products and services?
So thank you, Ivanka, again for this interview and for this question. And I think it's as Marco puts it, it's in the interest of both the firms and the consumers. Because in the end of the day, there is what we call dead weight. There is a lot of uncharted territories when some of this value, hidden value, is there. Now, obviously, the value is a value that is not generated by consumers. And because consumers do not use this value, they're not paying for that. And these are lost revenues and lost profits for companies. So the question is, in some sense, how to use this value, how to unhide this value, how to reduce this waste concept that Marco has mentioned earlier, and then decide how to distribute it. So in some sense, the distribution of that, it's a function of many things, but basically revealing this waste, revealing this dead weight, this is the main, I think, underlying importance of these new revenue models.
Excellent.
Yeah, please.
And I suppose this is really topical now in today's society. I mean, we are very conscious about our choices when it comes to consumption, and we want to reduce as much as possible any inefficiencies, and particularly from the resource side. Can you give us examples of what kind of waste, and with particular product and service examples, perhaps, you're able to reduce through outcomes?
Yeah. Well, go on ahead.
No, so I had earlier today. I had a meeting with a company that basically helps investors to find basically tailor between investors to organizations that help unprivileged citizens. And one of the ways they are working is the following. They're basically, the investors put money in the organization. These are not donors. These are investors. Now, the investors, basically, the company is trying to find ways to help the unprivileged people, and the government reimburse the investors based on the success of the organization. For example, education. They try to go to kids which are unprivileged in math, do not have access to iMath education. So the purpose is to find a way to basically educate them, to give them access to math. And the government reimbursed the investors, not the company, based on the amount of kids who were able to pass exams in an acceptable level, which they couldn't otherwise. This is, for example, one of the benefits, by the way, in this case, both to investors, but mostly to the society as a whole and the consumers.
Let me just add, Ivanka, just 1 second on what Oded was saying. So, if we just... his example is great. Let's just step up from that a second and think about just theoretically what we're talking about here. So we came to this idea in the book that when, again, going back to these drills and whole situation, when if I am looking for a solution to a problem, okay, as a customer, that's what we do. What are the necessary conditions, okay, that a customer has to necessarily have to go through in order to have that solution? Well, if you think about it, there are three. They have to access your product and service. If I don't access a school, a pharmaceutical product, a car, I am not learning, I'm not getting better, I am not, going anywhere. So I have to have access to a solution. That's the number one necessary condition. Number two, I have to consume that product or service. Clearly, if I want a benefit, I'm likely to consume. Yeah, but probably we'll discuss later. There is, consumption and payment are not one-to-one. Sometimes we pay for something we don't use, like a gym, for example, or vice versa. We use something too much, like an insurance, and insurance companies will like to hold us back a little bit. Okay, so I access, I consume, and then of course it has to perform. Because it's not good to me that I go to a school, I'm consuming a school by sitting in the classroom, and I learn zero. Okay, so these three conditions together are necessary and sufficient in order for you, a customer, to derive value. So then we thought about this. I'm selling a drill. Remember, that's the old style model. That is a very, very, very poor, in this day and age, and I'm sure we're going to get into this, it's a very poor form of access. Hey, you want something? Buy it outright. That's a pretty onerous form of access, right? And it has nothing to do with consumption, and it has nothing to do with performance. Okay? So then we started thinking about, well, what revenue models are out there that actually improve or guarantee or are tailored to provide access, like a subscription, provide consumption, pay-per-use, sharing, provide performance, a pay-for-performance contract. And see, all of these things we will claim are more efficient because they attack the problem of the customer, which is I need to access, consume, and it has to perform in order for me to derive value. We don't hear Ivanka. I think you're on mute.
Thanks for that. So I suppose that we are starting to get more and more familiar with this as users and consumers on daily basis. I mean, we are now users of Spotify or Netflix, or we potentially use Uber or any other services. Would that be for an everyday user examples of the model that you're proposing? Excellent. All right. So you mentioned earlier that this has been around for a long time. You said Theodore Levitt is a professor at Harvard Business School that proposed this basically in the 70s, right? From what I recall, Rolls-Royce has started this shift from selling engines to actually charging customers for the use of engines per flying hour. We're talking about airplane engines already in the 60s. So what is different now? We are basically quite a long time away from that, right? 60 years later, or 50 or 60 years later, why are we now talking about this? Why has this been so dormant for such a long time? Before you get to answer that question, let me just remind the audience that we are very, very interested to see your comments and questions in the comment section. I will, at the end of the 30 minutes webinar, summarize the questions and then ask Marco and Oded to answer them. So please keep them coming. We'll make sure to answer them. Marco, Oded, back to you. Why now?
So I think there are three main reasons for the why now. I think the first is building on Theodore Levitt concerns in the past and recognizing the gap. There was increasing tension between a firm strategy that put consumers in the middle to firms' pricing and revenue model strategies that basically look at a product or the service as the unit of analysis. So there is a gap. In some sense, when we design services, we put consumers as the unit of analysis. When we translate it to revenue models, usually it's the product, it's the ownership. Mm-hmm. And this increasing gap created also almost like accelerated this waste concept and created a tension between what the firm is doing to what the firm is communicating with consumers. The second thing, I think the second reason for now is the IT. The information technology revolution enables companies and consumers to monitor data, to accumulate data, to analyze data in a way like ever before. And that's basically is a tool that many of the companies that and many of the examples that Marco described earlier, and many of the examples in the book underline is the ability to use data and to analyze data in order to translate it into these richer revenue models. And the third thing is, I think, competitive pressure. I think we see more and more companies building because of the other previous reasons. And using using more sophisticated revenue models that emphasize their competitive advantage and put other companies in disadvantage, which forces them to rethink the revenue model and rethink about the advantages of what they perform and what they provide to consumers.
Excellent. So on your point about the data, I understand very well, how we've widened the gap. I understand the competitive side. But on the point of the data, can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of data we are talking about? What is the nature of it? What companies need to do in order to benefit from it? I mean, you cover it quite nicely in the book. I'm sure that the audience would be interested.
Yeah, so there we use this term. We coined this term impact data in the book as a means to sort of differentiate itself from the other type of data that we have been grown accustomed to gather, right? And so we think about it in three waves, just to make it clear when we know the map. When we realized back in the 60s that we wanted to know our customers better, the first thing we did is we asked them about their needs, right? So needs and wants data is focus group surveys, deep interviews, observation, exploratory research meant to understand what is driving the behavior of customers so that then I can segment my customers based on needs, right? As opposed to what they look like, where they've been, whatever. And I know, after the end of the day, I know causation. I know what is motivating them to go out and look for a purchase. Then, some years later, we started realizing that if we really wanted to know our customers, not only did you have to know why they're going out to buy, you have to know how they buy, right? Because if you know the purchase, the decision-making funnel used to be called, but now it's a customer experience. If I know all the different channels my customer is using on the route to a purchase, all the different media they rely on, or the different influencers they may rely on for a purchase, then I can map that out, and I can engineer the best possible purchase funnel by dialing up the investment in these channels, dialing down that one, and trying to maximize the likelihood that a customer goes through this funnel or process and buys me. That stops at the moment of purchase, right? Now, we say, well, there's a third wave of data, and that data has a lot to do with what happens after the purchase. We can now, through sensors, through advanced analytics, through cloud computing, to microtransactions, you name it, we can basically, for most products today, we can tell what happens to that product or service afterwards when the customer takes it home, right? I'm sitting on a chair right now. If there was a sensor under you know where, right, then that sensor would tell you as the manufacturer, Marco is sitting, Marco is not sitting, Marco is sitting again, Marco is not sitting, right? And that tells you something about the waste, right? I've got a chair that I'm not necessarily using all the time because I don't sit 24 hours a day. And that may make you think differently about the way I make money. I generate revenue from it. So the data lets us know when you're consuming something, how frequently you're consuming something, and in some situations, even what is the value of that actual consumption, right? If I'm able to turn it into some sort of metric that I can put into dollar, euro, pound, whatever terms.
Okay. So do I understand it correctly then that data, that impact data, helps to create the KPIs or the measures of the value that the customer is basically benefit from? Is that the way it works, or there's other ways to use the impact data?
No, the data will monitor, and I think as Marco said, the data will monitor when consumers using it, how do they use it, and whether they benefit from it or not. Now, again, depends on the sophistication of the sensors, and depends on the agreement between buyers and sellers. There will be we should find the ways to use this data to benefit actually both consumers and firms, because the necessary conditions for these revenues models to work for the long run is that it benefit both sides. And if this data that does not benefit both sides, then we may come into a dead end of using these revenue models. Because we know that data can be used to, in many cases, to support algorithmic pricing. Algorithmic pricing is something that goes against, in many cases, the revenue model that reduces this waste. And so we have to, again, the fact that we monitor data is a necessary condition. It's not sufficient. The question is, what do we do with the data, and whether it enables us to really measure the value that consumers are using it, either from actually using it or from the real benefit that they generate from the product, from the service.
All right, so now I understand. So the impact data basically helps us directly measure the value or more directly measure the value for the customers. But that does not necessarily mean that the value is then transferred to the customers. It just gives a clear signal of what the value represents, which enables them for the better revenue models, whatever they may be.
Ivanka, one way I think about it is the following: that with this data, I can finally have insight into that waste that I think was happening.
Yeah.
People are buying cars. I think that people don't use cars all the time. I think so, right? But now I can see it. I can literally see it to the minute when a car's being used. And so when you know that, what happens? Well, you know the waste, dead weight loss, as Oded said, and that's not good for anybody. That dead weight loss is bad, is stuff that evaporates. So once it doesn't evaporate because I can measure it, quantify it, then it's up to the company in a sense to say, well, how do I split this with my customer? In what percentage? Okay. But at least I have insight into this now, something that I could not deal with before. And that was completely suboptimal for everybody.
So one question on the value. I mean, we're talking at the moment about the value of the services that the data measures, but what about the value of the data itself? There is a very popular Netflix documentary at the moment that's trending called Social Dilemma, and it basically shows how disclosure of the data from the end user or customer side basically leads to suboptimal situations for the customers, manipulations of their spending behavior. Is there anything on that in that regard that you would like to point to? How do you see that?
So I hate to see the social dilemma. So I'll be very careful in my answer here. But my understanding here is the following. Basically, it's the usual concerns about abusing data that the companies accumulate and using it against consumers. Now, obviously, accumulating data providing for advantage for firms. Whether the firm will use it for the short run for the benefits of both consumers and firm, and later on take advantage, that's to be seen. So we believe that in the short run, if the firms really want to unlock some of these waste, which is based again performance, usage, or access, they would need to use this data in order to support these revenue models. Now, it might be the case that the evolutionary process, which is like a game between sellers and buyers, it might be the case that in the future, firms will take advantage of that, and the market will evolve in this direction. But we think that in the short run, as Marco mentioned it earlier, it's for the benefits of both firm and consumers that this data will take and will support the new revenue models, and which will unlock this value and find the efficient way to split it between consumers and firms.
And Ivanka, in addition, I have watched the documentary and I actually find it very entertaining. But I think one of the very big differences also is the fact that in these media models, what's happening, the trigger of it is the business model, right? In the sense that these folks are potentially making money off a third party, okay, because the advertisers are paying them on basically metrics that can become detrimental to the actual user. How much time do you spend on the screen? How much you do this, how much you do that? Okay, so there is because I'm starting, the money is coming from some other party, I turn my attention away from the user to the other party and say, hey, how can I get the most money from you? Even if the user in the end is actually not served properly. In our case, it's between me and you. You're my customer, I am the firm. Okay, I know that there's something wrong with the way I was charging you before because I made you purchase all of your wardrobe, right? I made you purchase it outright. Okay, then I can think, okay, hold on a second. Is there, if you like fashion, is there a way for me to maybe, provide you access to fashion without having the capital expenditure, or the books that you have in your library, or whatever it may be, right? Or the music that you listen to. This is me and you, right? It's not like going through a third party, which I think makes it a bit more perverse.
Good. So excellent. So on that point, now that we have examined a little bit, the value side, and particularly value from society for customers, and clearly value for the companies. Can you tell us a little bit more about challenges for companies? So in past, not having this impact data was one of the key reasons why companies wouldn't go for outcome-based business models. Now they have it, but are there any challenges that still remain that need to be resolved before this moves into the mainstream?
So in some sense, and the charge or the paper performance is the end of a journey. It's not only the end game; it's the end of the journey. And if I have to predict, in most cases, companies will have challenging time to start with paper performance. That's in some sense, the holy grail. That's where they want to go. But because of different constraints like data, like moral hazard, the fact that there is asymmetric information, the fact there is lack of trust, it will be challenging to go this way. Some companies were able, and there are numerous examples of companies who are able to do that, but some companies are basically using it as the ideal point where we want to end. And in this journey, they basically need to convince themselves and get an understanding of what the value that they create to consumers. And in many cases, I think one of the biggest challenges that I face discussing with many managers, there is almost like a lack of agreement between consumers and firms about what is this value. It's a moment of truth for many companies to understanding what is their value. And then if there is a consensus of what is the value, how can we charge for this value? And I think that's, for me, that's the main challenge that companies are facing. Okay, we want to charge for value. First, let's recognize what it is. Then whether we can do that, whether we can have agreement with our customers about this value. And it's and as I said, a moment of truth. If they cannot do that, then they can settle to other revenue models, less sophisticated, and pay per use or pay per access. All the metering and unbundling and different families of revenue models. Unfortunately, for some companies, they have to settle for the old pay for ownership if they cannot meet these challenges.
Understood. Mark, is there anything on your side that you would like to add, or?
Yeah, I think, maybe a couple of things. So the part that Oded was just mentioning, we have a term that we use in the book called the quality paradox, which we found very interesting, because the companies, you would think logically, the companies that should be all gung-ho about, hey, I want to go all the way to pay per outcome, because that's the way to go, is the companies that actually deliver better outcomes. So the ones that do have a better mousetrap. You would think that would be the case, right? But when you start analyzing companies and how they do these things, it is the companies that spend a lot of money on R&D, very tech-driven, very sophisticated, that tend to be the ones that are the most conservative. So it's a bit of a hence the paradox part. Why? Because in the process of developing these amazing mousetraps, they actually fall in love with the mousetraps. So in pharmaceuticals, it happens a lot, actually. In my experience, you kind of tend to fall in love with this amazing treatment that can cure people's lives. I never even consider charging anything but the treatment or the pill. And the other part of it, which is much more from an accounting perspective, I spend so much money on developing this thing that I want my return. So I'm going to do maybe a cost plus ownership model, because I know that every time that I sell something, it's going to make some money. And then I think the other one I want to mention, because we don't want to go necessarily too much over time, the other thing that I want to mention, which is I think maybe a couple of things I think they're important. One of them is it's amazing how organizations, when they pass the first hurdle that was mentioning, and I understand what the outcome is, you have to go back and look at your current product portfolio, and you have to see, hold on a second, is it designed for optimal outcomes? And guess what the answer is? Oftentimes, they're not, right? They were designed with a compromise of political interests, maybe over-specified, maybe some legacy over here. And so actually, one thing you've got to do when you do this, which is a bit of a challenge, is actually going back and rethinking your portfolio with outcomes as the final outcome, pardon the pun, right? Yeah. And then last but not least, the big question always in these companies is, how do we do the transition? If we sell them on all these things, what do you do, right? Do you kill the old business model and bet the farm on the new one? Pull an Adobe sort of thing? Or do you do an HP sort of thing with Instant Ink, where you actually have both business models running at the same time? So, we can have a big discussion just about that. Yeah. But actually managing that political landscape inside the organization is probably subject for a whole book, I think, all by itself.
So I'm glad you say that, because that's kind of the research that I'm doing, and a lot of what I and my colleagues work on is actually that organizational on the management side, how you manage the cannibalization of the products that you're selling with the outcomes, how you organize for that, how you make sure that the head of your product business unit is not going to start a small revolution when you start selling outcome as the other unit. So all these kind of challenges are absolutely pertinent, and I think have been delaying the introduction of the outcomes as much as data, a lack of data was. But
Ivanka,
go ahead.
About this point, it's interesting that you mentioned the issue of cannibalization. So you can look at revenue models almost like we speak about usually cannibalization in the context of product line, within a product line. And I agree, there is a potential cannibalization also when you think about revenue models. But in some sense, if companies can manage it effectively, it can actually, if companies can allow different revenue models, exactly like Marco described earlier, and allow customers self-select based on their preferences, whether they believe to the data, whether they want to go with the data, or whether they want to prefer to buy per ownership, and that's one way to manage it. I agree, it's challenging as to challenge any cannibalization.
Yeah, it's
Ivanka,
Mhm.
one fun fact, because you mentioned delaying the changes, right? We have a passage in the book about there's pharmaceutical company heads in front of a steering committee in U.S. Congress, I think it was, and they're basically talking about how the industry really needs to move to performance on healthcare, because this is just it makes no sense to charge by the pill. And then we sort of ask, that's a pertinent discussion today, right? Guess what? It was 1954. This discussion had been going on for 70 years almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Because whether it's selling a pill that's protected by a patent, or whether it's selling maintenance and spare parts in the case of the equipment where you can charge very high margins, companies find it hard to give up on that, particularly if they have been using razor blade model previously, where they have been lowering down their equipment prices in order to boost their consumables and their after sales products. But I agree with you, and I'm going to take you up on it. Let's make this a topic for the next webinar or even the next book. On this note, first of all, let me thank you for this excellent summary. It was really, really interesting. And having read the book, I know that you have touched upon the most important points. However, there's absolutely more interesting examples and nuances that I have read about. So I would encourage our audience to go and pick up the book from the bookstores. But before we close for today, we have time for a couple of more questions. So I'm going to now go to the first question that was asked in the line by Shivam. Shivam has asked, will value-based pricing be driven by market leaders or by smaller brands, new entrants? I think that's quite an interesting one. I leave that up to you, Oded or Marco, whoever wants to pick it up.
So I'll go with that one. So in our research, what we found is that you've got basically, and this is not a satisfactory answer for a friend, a bit of both, right? Mm-hmm. And there is a reason why, which maybe makes the answer satisfactory. There is a reason why it's a bit of both, right? Think of your customer as a magnet. The customer is the one that decides how much something is worth and decides to open up the wallet or close the wallet. Okay, so everything starts and ends with customers. Okay, we create value for them. They decide how much to pay us. So, right. So when we identify, then the question is, who identifies this amazing amount of inefficiency in some markets and where it lies? Okay, well, it could be an incumbent that's, with the experience that they have. And I'm thinking of Adobe off the top of my head, where you start realizing to yourself, I'm the market leader. What do I have? 80% market share. I sell CDs in a cardboard box. How long is that going to last? And then even though it's very, very, very hard, and I know it's very, very hard, it was very, very hard for them to change, they had to do this, okay? Cannibalization or not, they had to do this. So they spotted it and they took action, although it's hard. Other times you got these startups that start from even though it's not explicit, they start from a realization of waste. Because how many stories have you heard from entrepreneurs saying, I am a buyer of this. This is very frustrating purchase process. I wish there was a better way of doing it. Dollar Shave Club being one example. Okay, that is a N of one, a sample of one realization that there is waste in the process. Okay, and of course the advantage new starters have is that they have no legacy. So oftentimes I think if I had to draw the line, I would say that startups have the advantage when it comes to business model innovation. Because, a business model in a company has tentacles everywhere, across divisions, across time. And in the case of startups, there is no tentacles. There's nothing there. There's no legacy, right? Anyway, answer is you really see it both ways. Why? Because it's who spots that waste first and who is able to act on it effectively first.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question in the line concerns really impact data. So Maria del Carmen suggests that one of the challenges is to capture and measure gender perspective, actually to capture gender, particularly in the digital services. She wonders whether you have considered this, whether companies are, struggling with managing gender. Are they at all paying attention to it? Is this important in your opinion?
First, let's start with from the end. It's very important, for my opinion, and because I think the way consumers generate value from different products may depends on gender. Not every product, in some products. Whether companies are doing it or not, we know they do gender, they monitor gender. Whether they use it and translate into the value, that's a different question. Now, if in the end, if it will be on pay-per use or pay-per access, I doubt whether gender will be use of gender data on gender will be different than any other revenue models. When it will be based on performance, it might be the case, because then the translation and the difference between the gender may be translated into different values from of different products. So again, I think it's a more general question than our book. But I think that the pay-per performance definitely provide opportunity for companies to build on this data.
Excellent. Thank you. A question from Zaid Al-Shemari comes about the value, the intrinsic value of the impact data. And he's asking whether by collecting data on products or services sold to the customers, should customers be reimbursed in some way for the insights gained by the companies, I assume? And how will this access be framed?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I can take that one there. So absolutely, there is one of the big deals in our book is the fact that when you are shifting risk from the customer, the risk of access, consumption, and performance from the customer shoulders, because I sell ownership, to myself because I'm making money only on performance, then the customer paradoxically has no incentive to behave. Okay. So think of any situation where the outcome is co-produced by firm and customer. Again, healthcare. I may have the best treatment in the world, but if you don't inject it in the right place, it doesn't do anything. Or if you don't eat the pill at the right time, it doesn't do anything. I may have the best educational software in the world, but if you don't pay attention, it doesn't do anything, right? So there are many outcomes require customers in order to have achieve a quality outcome. So we say, look, it's in the company's best interest, of course, to achieve quality outcomes because I'm getting paid on outcomes. So I need to motivate my customers to do the right thing, so to speak. And we're very clear. The very first thing you do is you say, well, look, by doing this, you're actually growing the pie because I'm turning dead weight loss into a bigger pie. You would be a fool almost to say, that's all for me as a company, because you're leaving no incentive to customers, right? The customer will be completely indifferent between a smaller pie and a bigger pie because my share is the same. So the very first thing you do is you say, hey, now this is a trick. Customer, the bigger the pie, the more proportionally you benefit, because I want to steer you towards good quality outcomes. So the more you perform in line with good quality outcomes, the more I give you the share of what is unlocked. Okay? That's a basic one. And on top of that, we talk about contracts. We talk about gamification in consumer markets to incentivize nudging folks to do the right thing. And then also, this is for industrial markets, we talk about companies that say, look, customer, I kind of know how to apply my technology in your business better than you do. So let me come into your business and let me operate this, right? And then we will share the bigger pie, so that we both benefit. But for sure, the customer has to benefit. Why would I give you my data if I get nothing out of it?
And the last argument for that is that actually this data can help us to redesign the product and evolve it. So when, specifically the first two examples, education and pharmaceutical, we can use this data actually to tailor and improve the products. So that's an additional benefit for the consumers.
Excellent. We are getting to the 4:40, so the point where we end our webinar Q&A session. Let me see if I got all the main takeaways from the webinar and from the book right. So So first of all, the basic tenet is that there is inherently waste in the consumption process, either because consumers cannot buy products that they need, or because they buy products that they think they needed, but actually the products do not deliver enough value, or there is some form of inefficiency in how that works. And outcomes solve that problem to the extent that they are actually payment specifically for the value and not for the product that, or the vessel or the means that's supposed to deliver that value. And for that, impact data, or that captures the value and quantifies this, it's crucial. We had a very vivid discussion about how it's used in order to ensure better value for the customers. And we also see a number of challenges that companies are still have to overcome, particularly on the organizational and management side, in order to take the full potential of the outcomes. So is that fair? Did I summarize all the points?
Amazing.
Excellent. All right. Well, on that note, let me repeat the name of the book. It's The End Games: How Smart Companies Stop Selling Products and Start Delivering Services. Oded and Marco, thank you again very much for spending time with us. And this is the Institute for Innovation and Knowledge Management of Esade. Do Better webinar series. Thank you all for joining, and I wish you a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Ivanka.
Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.